We hear about the housing crisis in this country. Do you actually think it's a crisis?
I absolutely think it's a crisis. There has been an increased demand for rental housing since 2008, in not only here in San Mateo County, but nationwide. So what we're seeing is people looking for housing that they absolutely can't find because there's so much demand for rental housing now that we can't meet it. So combination of the recession that created a wide income gap, and that continues to expand today. And then you also had people who were in foreclosed homes during the foreclosure crisis that were pushed out into the rental market, and those who rented homes that were foreclosed into the rental market, and a growing number of people who are aging in this population who are on fixed income. So what you have is this increased demand for affordable housing when we have very few affordable housing options to offer.
Is it a crisis as far as you're concerned, Sue?
Yes, it is. We work with single moms, ages 18 to 30, and not a day goes by that we don't discuss housing and think of where can we house this one mom. And we're really excited to be partnering with HIP Housing because we think they have some really creative solutions.
Housing, you're the community outreach manager.
Mm-hmm.
So when you do the outreach, is it a crisis situation for those you talk with?
I absolutely see it as a crisis situation for the people we talk with. Something that I see when I do my research and when I go out into the community is that there's a lot of attention given to the major cities and how the major cities have been gentrified and people have been pushed out and they can't afford to live there. And I think what you don't see is that it extends beyond those major cities, right? We're living on the peninsula, and so all of what we hear about is this horrible crisis that exists in San Francisco, the ire over Google and Facebook and their buses and all of the people who can't afford to live in San Francisco, but it's not just the city, it's everywhere. And so when we do our work throughout the peninsula, we really see that people can't afford to live in this county at all.
So if they can't afford to live in this county, if it's a nationwide issue, where are they going to live?
So I think there's this common belief, that you're going to drive to where it's affordable. So, if you can't live here, that's okay. You can live in the Central Valley and commute in. So in San Mateo County, for example, we have 184,000 people that are commuting in and out of this county to work every day. So not only is there a serious environmental issue with that when you have that many people in cars on the road, and traffic issues and all the other, combined complications with that, but then you also have quality of life. I mean, if you're spending 2, 3, 4 hours a day on the road traveling, there's an exponential impact on your life and the way you can interact in your own communities and with your children and your quality of life. So, we're not just talking about a small amount of people. We're talking about thousands and thousands of people that are struggling to have, a work-life balance that creates a healthy lifestyle.
So if we're talking about thousands of people and you're attempting to work out creative, affordable solutions, what's the answer? Do you see this as something getting better, the situation?
Not on its own, surely not on its own, right? And so that's where partnerships like the one that we've founded really comes in, because you can't just sort of expect something like this to heal itself. Like Kate was saying, when you have this many people commuting out, something that I find most troubling about that as the community manager and as someone who spends a lot of time just talking to individuals is that you end up with a community that looks very different in the daytime than it does after people go home from work. You find that a very diverse group of people travel in from wherever they're traveling in from to work here, and everyone has to work here, right? You create one very high-profile job in the tech industry, in law, in medicine, in anything. 5 service jobs come with that. So jobs are created here. This is an economic boom, but if it's not a housing boom, then people are doing all of this traveling, and everyone goes home at the end of the day, and it all looks very different than it did in the daytime. And I find that extremely troubling. So there has to be something done with that, right? And a great part of this partnership then is that we use so many of the organizations that happen on the ground and the people who do live here and are concerned with what happens here, and we try to mobilize from there and try to create something that people can work together as a larger community to house each other almost.
Well, Lena just now said that it's troubling, and she attempts to work with the people who live here. Do you really think the people who live here, who can afford to be here, actually care?
So this is a challenge, right? There's this misconception about who needs affordable housing, right? There's this idea that people who live in affordable housing somehow aren't trying, they aren't working families, they've come from someplace else and they didn't realize how expensive it was going to be here, so, it's their own fault. But that's not really the case. So the average one-bedroom apartment in San Mateo County runs about $2,100. That is a 20% increase in the last 2 years. So what you're finding is people who had stable housing, who have jobs, all of a sudden can't afford their apartments. It takes about $84,000 a year to be able to afford a one-bedroom apartment at $2,100 a year.
Now, the people that you talk about, are they people who do have jobs, or are they people who've fallen below the poverty line?
So when you talk about who's using affordable housing, pretty much anybody who isn't making $84,000 a year or more isn't going to be able to afford an apartment. So there's a lot of service positions in this county that make a lot less than that. In fact, the average new job being created in this county is about $50,000 or less. So service positions, and you have EMTs, substitute teachers, you have bank tellers, people who work in spas, people who provide the services that make this a really desirable place to live for those who are making larger incomes, but yet they can't afford to live here.
Well, we see some homeless people, but we don't see all of the people that you're talking about who don't make $84,000 a year living on the streets. Or do we, Sue?
So with the women that we work with, they are earning much lower than $84,000 a year. And for the most part, they live with their family, and they live in homes where there might be 15 people living in one home. Mm-hmm. They rent a room, but there might be 2 or 3 people in their room. And so they're not on the streets, but they are dependent on other people and help. What we would love is for them to be in a situation where they have their own apartment, they have children, where they're independent. Our goal is economic self-sufficiency, and we would love for them to have stable housing, stable, safe, and affordable housing, so that they can really focus on going back to school, improving their job skills, finding a career where they can have the potential to make $84,000 a year or more.
Now, that brings up, and it's just an opinion for the 3 of you, if we talk about a need to make $84,000 a year just to have an apartment here, then what we're talking about is increasing the minimum wage. And I'm sure the 3 of you might be for that.
Yeah, I mean, we live in the seventh largest economy in the world, just here in the peninsula, right? The idea that we can't pay a living wage to an individual.
What would be a living wage?
It's $12 plus an hour at minimum wage.
Well, we're only talking now about what? Yes, I was going to say a possibility of 10, and I think it's 10 in San Francisco.
There's a push for 12, though.
It's going up to 9, right, this summer, and then it's going up to 10.
The following year.
Yeah.
There is some movement on the minimum wage. I'm not an expert in it. I know that Santa Clara County has just bumped their minimum wage up. San Francisco is already one of the highest in the country. But the truth is, you really need to make at least $12 an hour. And I do think that Barbara Boxer actually has just called for a minimum wage hike to $12 an hour.
No, it's said that if you do bump it up, then that there'll be even less people employed.
So this is the challenge, right? It's the difference between everybody has a right to make a profit to how much is enough, right? At what point are you really doing the economy and your community a real disservice by keeping all of the wealth at the top end of the pay scale, where you don't pay the lower workers a living wage? So it's an awareness that needs to be made at the top levels of management to understand that they're doing not only themselves a disservice, but the communities a disservice, and certainly their employees a disservice. And when you do that, you're not going to have healthy, productive companies, right? You need to be able to have everybody feel like they can live close to where they work, where they can be responsive, where they can make a living wage, be happy, stay content, stay in their jobs. I mean, it's to everybody's benefit to have a living wage.
If you have that perspective, yes, it is to everybody's benefit. But talk to someone whose job it is to maximize their company's profits. And it's the profit that's the most important thing.
Yeah. And
so Sue is about re-education to empower people, and we would talk about have a need for re-education for those at the top management in various companies.
You know, there's a lot of pieces to the affordable housing crisis, right? It's what someone can earn, it's where someone has grown up, where they're comfortable, where their family support is. There's so many pieces involved. I think that as we look at how do we keep people housed, you know, we have to take it in the larger context of what does that mean. We have to look at transportation. How do people get to and from work? What do they make? How can they earn enough? Through job training, through, you know, a minimum wage increase, all of the different pieces and parts are going to create a healthy community. And I think that going forward, we need to look at a new normal. You know, who works together? How do nonprofits and for-profits work together? How do cities work together in new ways? How do we recreate a community where everybody is healthy, where we have a middle class, and that we can break cycles of poverty?
Lena, you might have some ideas, I am sure, on what you've heard. And Kate talked about the pieces. Have we covered the pieces that you think that you've heard thus far?
You know, I really like the idea of a new normal. And my piece on it is that people have to be able to live together. You gave the great example of go and chat with someone whose job it is to make sure that their company has a larger profit and see how they feel about raising the minimum wage, right? And to that I would say that poverty is everyone's problem. It is. If we have a country where too many people can't make a living wage and we have a shrinking middle class, then that does become everyone's problem and negatively affects everyone. And that's not a place where really any of us want to live. Maybe there is a small percentage of people who can afford to escape that day to day, right? Who don't have to see that. The 1% perhaps doesn't have to see that, but you know, most of us do, right? So I think that there's huge incentive then. Even if you don't see it as immediately your problem, if you don't see it as something that's in front of you, if you don't see homeless on the streets of San Mateo County every day, knowing that that's coming and knowing that people are living in situations like the ones Sue talked about is, at the end of the day, your issue, because down the line it will become your issue. And I think that that's what it takes convincing, right? Telling people that this is a community problem. This is something that we have to fight together, because otherwise it'll fall apart, and when it falls apart, it'll be something that falls apart on everyone's hands.
Well, I think a lot of it has already fallen apart, would you say? With more and more people falling at the poverty line or below the poverty line.
And the growing income gap is huge. I think, you know, you don't see it because you have agencies like Able Works, like Hip Housing, that are there to pick up the pieces, that are working together to make sure that people do have housing, that they do have the services that they need to break their cycle of poverty. But we struggle every day to make sure that our programs are solid and strong, and that we can keep those doors open to those programs.
Well, I was just now about to ask you that. If organizations such as yours have the necessary resources, are those resources increasing or are those resources dwindling? Or remaining?
There's a great deal of wealth in this community, and there's a lot of generosity in this community, I think, towards the nonprofit sector. A lot of people who are really working hard to do the right thing. But it is a struggle. There's fewer and fewer dollars that come from the public sector, for sure. With the dissolution of redevelopment agencies, we've seen $1 billion disappear from the affordable housing market. You know, with sequestration, you have continued cuts to CDBG block grants, which help fund a lot of nonprofits. You see a lot of local giving going international because many of the people who live here, I think they made their wealth and their fortunes in companies that are global. So they want to have a global impact with their philanthropy, and they give, you know, internationally. I mean, if you've been to India, and India looks a lot different than here, maybe you'd be more likely to give there than you would here. But there's a great deal of need right here, and so there's a very active local push to, you know, you live here, you give here. Look and see what your community needs right here. It's certainly wonderful to try and be a global ambassador, but there's an awful lot that we can do right here to help the folks that we work with every day.
So you are, I said in the introduction that Able Works is about enabling people to be self-sufficient and economic empowerment.
Correct.
Given what we've just now talked about, the dwindling resources and what some of the challenges are, how do you go about enabling people to be self-sufficient?
So we, a year ago, we experimented with a cohort model, and we have 15 single moms who meet with us on a weekly basis. And we cover topics such as financial literacy, parenting, health and wellness, and not only that, we also provide case management. We have mental health counseling, we have legal counseling, we have credit counseling, financial or foreclosure counseling. So we really come around this group, and it's an accountability group, so they're moving together.
Now let me just ask you one thing that I
Sure.
did not ask you in the very beginning. What's a cohort model?
So a cohort model is when you take a group of people and they have some similar characteristics. For our group, they're single moms, they're low income, they're struggling, they're in survival mode, and they all are at a point in their life where they're ready to make a positive change in their life. They want to provide for their children, and so they're motivated. And so we work with them together, and they encourage each other.
Do they have jobs?
They all have a source of income. Most of them have jobs. It's very low income though, and so for every woman that we work with, their journey is slightly different. And what we do is we try to figure out where they're stuck. And we work with them one-on-one or as a group, and we help them to take that next step, whether it's getting their GED, whether it's helping them get a job, enrolling in community college. But in order to figure that out, you really have to work with them one-on-one.
For how long a period of time?
So we are just finishing our first year, and we don't feel like that's enough time. We know that we want to be involved in their lives for a longer...
Have you seen any progress?
We have.
What kind of progress?
We have several women who have opened up IDA savings accounts.
What's IDA?
That's an account that is matched, and they are required to complete financial training first, and then open up the account.
Matched by whom?
We work with the Opportunity Fund, and they match their contribution, and then they're required to deposit money on a regular basis, so that they're saving money for their future.
Well, there are a lot of follow-up questions I could ask you in terms of that, but since we're talking about creative, affordable housing solutions.
So this is, I'm really excited. I mean, I want to jump in here because what Sue's talking about is a really powerful program, right? But one of the fundamental pieces of getting anybody self-sufficient is providing housing or having them housed. You can't do anything unless you have stable housing. So we were approached by Able Works as part of a collaboration Reeducation to provide the housing component to the program that they're doing. And we have a similar program so that the match is really good. It's not an identical program. We're not overlapping services, but we can certainly complement each other's services. And this is where it's great when you start to see organizations working together, working with cities, working with private foundations, working with corporations. When you can get all the pieces working in a way that creates a little bit magic in the middle, that's when we have healthy communities. And so when we were approached by AbleWorks, we were really excited. Wow, you're working with single moms. You know, we're working with single families as well. And we provide housing scholarships so that they can focus on school while they go, you know, while we help them with the housing piece. And then we do some of the, some similar trainings and models so we can cross-refer now into each other's programs while providing affordable housing. So what HIP Housing does, we have 3 programs. We have a self-sufficiency program, which is kind of similar to what's just been described. We also have property development, so we own below market rate property so that we can help house people in our properties. And then in addition, we have a home sharing program where we partner those who have space in their home with those who need an affordable place to live. This is a really great program because it's pretty much the only affordable housing in town right now, or in the county and maybe in the state, that has an open wait list. We can
Well,
always take people.